Sarah Mitchell's world shattered in an instant. The ship's control panels blinked red as alarms screamed in her ear. She gripped the joystick tightly, fighting the violent tremors in the vessel as it plummeted toward the surface of an uncharted moon. The once steady hum of the engines was replaced by the sound of tearing metal and the howling wind outside, filling the cabin with an unnatural, eerie shriek. "Come on! Come on!" she muttered under her breath, desperately trying to regain control. Her hands were slick with sweat as she fought against the violent turbulence, but it was clear she wasn't going to make it. The horizon below her was already too close. There was no way to avoid the crash. Everything had gone wrong. A catastrophic failure in the ship's power system had sent them spiraling off course, and the emergency protocols hadn't triggered fast enough. The thought of the rest of her crew, of her fellow astronauts, still somewhere on board, flickered briefly in her mind. They were gone. She realized with a sinking heart. Sarah was alone. The crash was deafening. The force of impact shoved Sarah violently against her restraints, and for a moment, everything went black. When she came to, the ship was half buried in the dust of the moon's rocky surface. She could smell burning electronics, and her ears rang from the deafening screech of the crash. Her head throbbed, blood running down the side of her face from a gash. Her vision swam as she forced herself upright, her body aching in protest. The cockpit was a mess of twisted metal, fractured glass, and sparks still flying from the damaged systems. Taking a steadying breath, Sarah unclipped herself from her harness. Her body screamed in pain as she moved, but the adrenaline was enough to keep her moving. She needed to survive. She needed to figure out what the hell was going on. The comm system was fried, as expected. There was no way to send a distress signal, no way to call for help. Her survival gear, thankfully, was intact, so she grabbed the emergency pack from the compartment above her. The planet's surface was desolate. A dull, gray wasteland stretching endlessly in every direction. Not a single sign of life. Sarah's breath fogged in the cold atmosphere as she staggered to the hatch. A few desperate pulls and tugs later, it finally gave way, allowing her to crawl out into the unknown. She had no choice but to keep moving, hoping that somewhere out there might be something, or someone, that could help her. She surveyed her surroundings. The ground was covered in a fine layer of dust, and the sky above was a sickly shade of greenish-gray. The air was thin and cold. Not ideal for survival, but she had no other option. Sarah walked slowly, her eyes scanning the horizon. There was nothing, no sign of any life forms, not even plants or animals, just endless stretches of barren land. It was during her search for shelter that she heard it. A faint sound on the wind, something distant, something almost otherworldly. At first, Sarah dismissed it as the wind playing tricks on her ears. But as she pressed on, the sound grew louder. It was a soft cry, like the sound of a child calling out for help. Her heart leapt in her chest. Could there be life here after all? Her breath quickened as she followed the sound, each step growing more frantic, more desperate. The cry seemed to come from behind a jagged outcrop of rock, and Sarah's pace quickened as she neared the source. When she rounded the corner, she stopped dead in her tracks. There, lying in the shadow of the rocks, were two children. Alien children. They were small, their bodies delicate and covered in strange markings. The girl, no older than 8, was huddled next to a boy, maybe 10, who appeared to be shielding her with his small frame. Their eyes were wide, filled with fear and confusion. The girl's skin was a pale blue, shimmering faintly in the dim light. The boy, on the other hand, had dark, almost black skin that seemed to absorb the little light that filtered through the clouds above. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She had never seen anything like them before. They didn't look like the humanoid aliens she had studied during her training. They were different, strange, and utterly vulnerable. The girl whimpered softly as she lifted her head, her gaze locking with Sarah's. There was a moment of silence, a stillness that hung in the air, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The boy made a low, unintelligible sound and gently pulled the girl closer to him. His eyes darted around, clearly terrified, as though he was expecting something, or someone, to come after them. "Hey," Sarah said, her voice soft and cautious. "It's okay. I'm not here to hurt you." She took a slow step forward, her heart pounding in her chest. The boy tensed, his eyes narrowing, and Sarah froze, immediately recognizing the look of someone ready to fight or flee. But she wasn't a threat. At least she didn't think she was. "Can you understand me?" she asked gently, taking another step closer. The girl's wide, glowing eyes locked onto her, and for a moment, it seemed like the child was about to speak. But before she could, a loud crack split the air, a terrifying roar echoing across the barren landscape. Sarah's instincts kicked in. She turned, scanning the horizon. There was movement in the distance. A large, hulking shadow, darting between the rocks, closing in on them fast. The children gasped. The boy wrapped his arms around the girl protectively, but it was clear that they were terrified. Something was coming for them. Something dangerous. Without thinking, Sarah grabbed the children's hands, pulling them toward her. "We have to move. Now." The alien predator was coming closer, and Sarah had no time to waste. She scanned the area for cover, her mind racing. She had to protect these kids, even if she had no idea who or what they were. "Stay close to me," Sarah said urgently. She led them through the rocks, trying to shield them from view as she carefully moved around the sharp terrain. The predator's roar echoed louder, sending a shiver down her spine. It was closer now, and Sarah could hear its claws scraping against the rocky ground. They weren't alone anymore. Sarah's heart raced as she pulled the children through the jagged terrain, her breath coming in short, sharp bursts. The predator's growl echoed in the distance, the sound vibrating through the air, making the hair on the back of her neck stand on end. She glanced behind her, trying to track the creature's movements, but the rocky outcrops made it difficult to spot it. "Stay close," she urged, keeping her voice as steady as possible despite the fear gnawing at her. The boy and girl clung to her, their alien features wide-eyed and trembling. The boy's skin pulsed with an eerie glow, and the girl seemed to shimmer faintly, her blue skin almost translucent in the dim light. The girl whimpered, and Sarah's heart clenched. She had no idea what these children were or why they were here, but she knew one thing for sure: they were in danger and she was their only hope. As Sarah scrambled over a rocky ledge, pulling the children up after her, she spotted a narrow crevice that led into a small cave-like structure. The predator's growls were growing louder, and she knew it wouldn't be long before it caught their scent. They had to hide, and fast. "Over here," Sarah whispered urgently, motioning toward the crevice. She helped the children crawl inside, squeezing into the narrow space behind a large boulder. The boy kept glancing nervously over his shoulder, his small hands clutching the girl tightly. "Stay quiet," Sarah ordered in a low voice, crouching beside them. She tried to calm her breathing, her body tense and alert. They waited, holding their breaths, the cave now eerily silent except for the faint sound of their own heartbeats. A few moments passed, then Sarah heard it, claws scraping against the rocks. It was close, too close. She could feel the tension in the air, the fear building as the creature drew nearer. Every instinct told her to run, to get as far away from the predator as possible. But she knew that would be a death sentence. Her only option was to stay hidden and pray it passed by. The children seemed to sense the danger too. The boy squeezed the girl's hand, and Sarah could feel his body tremble slightly. She instinctively reached out to comfort him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "It's going to be okay," she murmured, though even she wasn't sure if she believed it. The creature's growls came closer, then stopped. Sarah's heart skipped a beat, and she held her breath. She strained her ears, listening carefully. The predator was near, too near. It seemed to be sniffing the air, searching for them. And then, just as quickly as it had stopped, the growling resumed, but it was moving away, fading into the distance. Sarah waited a few more moments, not daring to move or make a sound. When she was sure the predator was gone, she slowly exhaled. "It's gone," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We're safe for now." She turned to the children, her eyes scanning them both. The boy still looked terrified, his wide black eyes filled with fear. But there was something more, something deeper behind his gaze. A sadness, a desperation. Sarah couldn't quite place it, but she knew he was hiding something. Both of them were. "We need to keep moving," Sarah said, helping the children to their feet. "I don't know what that thing was, but it's not safe here." The boy nodded, his expression serious as he looked at Sarah, then at the girl beside him. She seemed to be in some kind of trance, staring ahead with a vacant expression. Her skin shimmered again, and Sarah caught a flash of something. A strange energy, like a faint ripple in the air around them. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked softly, kneeling in front of the girl. She reached out to gently touch her arm, but before she could make contact, the girl flinched, pulling away. Sarah's heart sank. She hadn't meant to frighten her, but it was clear the child was terrified, unsure of who to trust. The boy, however, seemed to watch Sarah carefully, his gaze calculating, as though weighing her every word and action. "I know you're scared," Sarah said gently, keeping her voice calm, "but we have to stick together if we're going to get out of here." The girl looked up at her then, her eyes wide, a silent plea in them. Sarah didn't know what to make of it, but the connection was undeniable. This child, with her strange, glowing skin, was asking for help. Without another word, Sarah led them through the rocky terrain, keeping her senses alert to any potential threats. The children followed quietly, the boy's hand still clutching the girl's. She could feel the weight of their reliance on her growing with each step. There was no turning back now. They reached a small ridge, and from there, Sarah could see something in the distance. Another structure, this one taller and more defined than the scattered rocks around them. It looked like a ruin of some sort, half buried in the dust. It was the closest thing to shelter they'd come across, and Sarah knew they had to investigate. "We'll head that way," Sarah said, pointing toward the ruins. "It might be safer." The boy looked uncertain but nodded, his grip tightening around the girl's hand as they started toward the structure. As they approached, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The air was thick, and the atmosphere felt heavy, as though it were pressing in on them from all sides. The structure loomed ahead, its edges jagged and dark, but it seemed to offer them some semblance of safety. When they finally reached the entrance, the boy hesitated. He glanced around nervously, then looked at Sarah. "Is it safe?" he asked in a language Sarah didn't understand. She shook her head. "I don't know, but it's better than being out in the open." The boy seemed to understand, though he still looked uncertain. He stepped forward, leading the girl into the shadow of the ruins. Sarah followed, her heart still pounding in her chest. As they entered the structure, a low hum filled the air, vibrating through the walls. Sarah looked around, trying to make sense of the strange sensation. She could feel the energy shifting, almost as if the very ground beneath her feet was alive. They were not alone. Before she could react, a voice rang out. Alien, distorted, and cold. "Who are you?" The voice was coming from somewhere deep within the ruins. "What have you done with them?" The hairs on the back of Sarah's neck stood up. The voice sent a chill down Sarah's spine. It reverberated through the ruins, bouncing off the jagged walls in an unearthly echo. The boy immediately tensed, stepping in front of the girl as though to shield her from whatever danger might be lurking. His gaze darted around, his muscles coiled and ready for flight. "Who are you?" the voice repeated, sharper this time. The air around them seemed to vibrate, heavy with an unseen force. "Why are you here?" Sarah raised her hands instinctively, trying to show she wasn't a threat. Her mind raced as she searched for a way to communicate. "We mean no harm," she called out, her voice strong but laced with uncertainty. "I'm just trying to help these children." A silence followed, heavy and suffocating. The hum in the air grew louder, like a pulse emanating from the walls themselves. Then, without warning, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was tall, towering over Sarah and the children, its form vaguely humanoid but unmistakably alien. Its skin shimmered with the same eerie glow as the girl's, though it seemed darker, more solid. Its eyes were large and luminescent, fixed on Sarah with an intensity that made her feel like it could see straight into her soul. The creature held a weapon of some kind. A long staff with a sharp, jagged edge that hummed with the same strange energy. The boy gasped and clutched the girl tighter, whispering something in their native tongue. The girl whimpered, hiding her face in the boy's shoulder. The alien's gaze flicked to the children, its expression, if it could be called that, shifting to something unreadable. It stepped closer, the weapon lowering slightly but still poised. "These children," it said slowly, its voice resonant and filled with a strange, otherworldly authority, "do not belong with you, human. Explain yourself." Sarah swallowed hard, her heart pounding. She stood her ground, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "I found them alone out there," she said, gesturing toward the desolate landscape behind her. "Something was hunting them. I'm trying to keep them safe." The alien's eyes narrowed, and it tilted its head as though weighing her words. "You are not their captor?" "No," Sarah said firmly. "I'm their protector." The alien studied her for a long moment, the hum of its weapon filling the silence. Then it turned its gaze back to the children. "Why did you leave the sanctuary?" it asked, its tone softer now, almost paternal. The boy hesitated, glancing nervously at Sarah before answering in their language. The alien listened intently, its expression growing darker with each word. When the boy finished, the alien let out a low, guttural sound, a mix of frustration and sorrow. "They are fugitives," the alien said, turning back to Sarah. "They have been marked as targets by forces you cannot comprehend. By aiding them, you have entangled yourself in a conflict far beyond your understanding." Sarah's stomach twisted, but she refused to back down. "I don't care what kind of conflict this is," she said. "They're just children. I won't abandon them." The alien studied her again, its glowing eyes narrowing. Then, to her surprise, it lowered its weapon completely. "You are brave," it said. "But bravery alone will not protect them, nor will it save you." Before Sarah could respond, a deep rumble shook the ground beneath them. Dust fell from the ceiling, and the walls groaned as if under immense pressure. The alien's head snapped toward the entrance, its body tensing. "They have found us," it said grimly. "The hunters are here." Sarah's blood ran cold. She didn't need to ask who they were. The alien predator from earlier was bad enough, but now it seemed there was more to contend with, something worse. The alien turned to the children, speaking rapidly in their language. The boy nodded, his face pale but determined, and the girl clung to him tightly. Then the alien looked at Sarah. "Follow me," it commanded. "If you wish to survive, you will do as I say." There was no time to argue. Sarah grabbed the children's hands, and together they followed the alien deeper into the ruins. The hum in the air grew louder, the walls vibrating with an almost sentient energy. Sarah could feel it under her skin, a strange tingling sensation that made her hair stand on end. They reached a large chamber at the heart of the ruins. The alien moved quickly, activating a series of strange devices embedded in the walls. Lights flickered to life, casting an eerie glow over the room. The children stayed close to Sarah, their fear palpable. "What is this place?" Sarah asked, her voice hushed. "A sanctuary," the alien replied. "One of the few remaining, but it will not hold against them for long." Sarah's mind raced as she tried to process everything. Who are they? What do they want with these kids? The alien hesitated, as if debating how much to tell her. "The children are important," it said finally. "They possess abilities that others seek to exploit, powers that could tip the balance of entire civilizations." Sarah glanced at the children, her heart aching. They were so young, so fragile, and yet they were at the center of something far bigger than she could have imagined. The ground shook again, more violently this time. A deafening roar echoed through the ruins, followed by the sound of metal scraping against stone. The hunters were closing in. The alien turned to Sarah, its expression urgent. "Take the children and go. There is a passageway hidden beneath that panel." It pointed to a section of the floor. "It will lead you to the surface." What about you? Sarah asked. I will hold them off, the alien said. But you must hurry. They will not stop until they have the children. Sarah hesitated, torn between wanting to help and knowing she had to protect the kids. The boy tugged at her hand, his eyes pleading. We have to go, he said softly. Nodding, Sarah moved to the panel and pried it open, revealing a narrow tunnel that sloped downward. She helped the children inside, her heart pounding as the sounds of the hunters grew louder. Just as she was about to climb in herself, she turned back to the alien. Thank you, she said, her voice filled with gratitude and determination. The alien nodded, its glowing eyes fierce. Protect them, it said. They are the key. With that, Sarah slid into the tunnel, pulling the panel closed behind her. The hum of the sanctuary faded as she descended into the darkness, the children close at her side. She didn't know where the tunnel would lead, but she knew one thing for certain. They had to keep moving. The hunt wasn't over yet. The narrow tunnel was dark and suffocating, the walls pressing in on all sides as Sarah led the children deeper into the unknown. Her flashlight cast long shadows that danced along the jagged stone, making the space feel even more oppressive. The only sounds were their hurried breaths and the faint scuffing of their shoes against the uneven floor. Every so often, Sarah glanced back at the children, her heart twisting at the sight of their pale, frightened faces. Keep moving, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her own heartbeat. The adrenaline from the encounter above still coursed through her veins, keeping her hyper-alert. We're almost there. The boy nodded, his jaw set in determination, but the girl was struggling. Her steps were unsteady, and she clung to her brother's arm for support. Sarah paused, kneeling to meet her at eye level. Are you okay? She asked softly, brushing a strand of silvery hair from the girl's face. The girl didn't respond, her wide eyes glassy with fear. Her skin shimmered faintly, pulsing with that strange, ethereal glow that seemed to intensify with her emotions. The boy crouched beside her, murmuring something in their language. The girl's trembling subsided slightly, but her gaze remained unfocused. She's exhausted, Sarah said, more to herself than to the boy. She reached out, gently placing a hand on the girl's shoulder. We'll rest as soon as we're safe, okay? Just a little farther. The girl nodded weakly, leaning against Sarah for support as they continued through the tunnel. The air grew colder, the silence heavier, and Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Her grip tightened on the flashlight, her other hand hovering near her holster. She didn't know if her weapon would be effective against whatever was out there, but the thought of being unarmed was unbearable. After what felt like an eternity, the tunnel widened into a small cavern. Stalactites hung from the ceiling, and a faint light filtered through cracks in the stone, casting an eerie glow over the space. Sarah scanned the area, her instincts on high alert. It seemed empty, but she knew better than to let her guard down. We'll rest here for a moment, she said, helping the girl to sit on a flat rock. The boy immediately knelt beside her, holding her hand and whispering soothing words. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. Her mind raced with questions. Who were these hunters? What made these children so important? And how far was she willing to go to protect them? Her thoughts were interrupted by a faint noise, a soft, rhythmic tapping that echoed through the cavern. She froze, her heart skipping a beat. The boy looked up, his eyes wide with alarm. He heard it too. Stay here, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. She drew her weapon, moving cautiously toward the source of the sound. Her flashlight illuminated the far end of the cavern, but there was nothing there. The tapping continued, growing louder, more erratic. It wasn't coming from one place, it was all around them. Sarah's pulse quickened as the tapping morphed into a low, guttural growl. The boy stood, stepping protectively in front of the girl, his small frame trembling but resolute. The girl whimpered, clutching her brother's arm as her glow intensified. Get behind me, Sarah ordered, motioning for the children to move closer. The growling grew louder, echoing off the cavern walls, until it was almost deafening. Then, From the shadows, a pair of glowing red eyes appeared. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as the creature stepped into the light. It was massive, its body sleek and muscular, with scales that shimmered like molten metal. Its jaws were lined with razor-sharp teeth, and its claws scraped against the stone as it advanced. "Run!" Sarah shouted, firing a shot at the creature. The bullet struck its shoulder, but it barely flinched. Instead, it roared, a sound so powerful it shook the ground beneath them. The children screamed, and Sarah fired again, aiming for its head. The shot grazed its cheek, but the creature didn't slow. The boy grabbed the girl's hand, pulling her toward the tunnel on the other side of the cavern. Sarah backed away, firing repeatedly, but the creature was relentless. Its eyes locked onto the children, and it lunged, its massive claws outstretched. "No!" Sarah shouted, throwing herself between the creature and the children. She fired point blank into its chest, the recoil jarring her arm. This time, the creature staggered, letting out a guttural snarl. It swiped at her with its claws, and she narrowly dodged, the force of the swing sending her sprawling to the ground. The boy turned, his expression one of desperation and determination. He raised his free hand, and suddenly, the air around him seemed to ripple. A burst of energy shot from his palm, striking the creature in the side. The beast howled in pain, its scales smoking where the energy had hit. Sarah stared in shock as the boy stepped forward, his hand glowing with the same strange energy. The creature hesitated, its glowing eyes narrowing as if reassessing the threat. The boy raised his hand again, another burst of energy crackling in the air. But this time, the creature retreated. It let out a final snarl before disappearing into the shadows. The cavern fell silent, the tension lingering like a heavy fog. Sarah pushed herself to her feet, her legs trembling. What was that?" she asked, her voice shaky. The boy turned to her, his glowing hand dimming as he lowered it. He didn't answer, his expression guarded. The girl clung to him, her glow flickering as though it were tied to her emotions. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "We need to keep moving," she said finally. "If that thing comes back, we won't be so lucky next time." The boy nodded, and together they helped the girl to her feet. As they entered the next tunnel, Sarah couldn't stop replaying the scene in her mind. The boy's power had been incredible, unlike anything she'd ever seen. It was no wonder the hunters were after them. If they fell into the wrong hands, she shook her head, pushing the thought aside. Right now, her priority was keeping them safe. Whatever secrets these children held, she would figure them out later, if they survived long enough to reach safety. The tunnel seemed endless, winding and narrow, with no hint of what lay ahead. Sarah moved as quickly as she could, keeping the children close. Her flashlight cast a shaky beam on the walls, its light flickering ominously as the batteries began to drain. The boy stayed alert, his eyes darting around at every sound, while the girl clung to his hand, her glow faint but steady. The air grew colder the deeper they went, carrying a faint metallic tang that set Sarah's nerves on edge. She could still feel the adrenaline pumping through her veins from their encounter in the cavern, her mind racing with unanswered questions. The boy's powers were undeniable, but they raised more concerns than they answered. What else was he capable of? And how much danger were they truly in? They reached a fork in the tunnel, the path splitting into two equally dark and foreboding passages. Sarah hesitated, shining her flashlight down each one. Both looked identical, with no clear indication of which way to go. She turned to the boy. "Do you know where this leads? Have you been here before?" The boy shook his head, his expression wary. "No. We've never been this far." Sarah bit her lip, frustration bubbling under her skin. "Great," she muttered, glancing between the two paths. "Just great." The girl whimpered softly, her grip tightening on her brother's hand. The boy leaned down, whispering something to her in their language. She nodded, her glow flickering faintly as she pressed her face against his shoulder. "We can't stay here," Sarah said, her voice low but firm. "We'll take the left tunnel. Stay close." And if you see or hear anything, tell me immediately." The boy nodded, and they moved as one into the left tunnel. The walls seemed to close in around them, the air growing heavier with every step. The flashlight flickered again, and Sarah cursed under her breath, smacking it against her palm. The light steadied, but she knew it wouldn't last much longer. After what felt like an eternity, the tunnel began to widen. The oppressive darkness lifted slightly, and Sarah spotted a faint glow ahead. She slowed her pace, her instincts screaming at her to be cautious. The boy mirrored her movements, his body tense and ready to act. The glow grew brighter as they approached, revealing the source. A large chamber filled with strange, bioluminescent plants. The walls were covered in glowing vines that pulsed with a soft, rhythmic light, casting the space in a surreal, otherworldly glow. Pools of iridescent liquid dotted the floor, their surfaces shimmering like molten silver. The girl's eyes lit up, her glow intensifying as she gazed around the chamber in wonder. She tugged on her brother's hand, pointing at one of the glowing plants. The boy hesitated, then nodded, letting her approach it cautiously. Sarah watched them carefully, her hand hovering near her weapon. The chamber was beautiful, almost serene, but something about it felt off. The air was too still, the silence too complete. She scanned the area, her senses on high alert, but saw no immediate threats. The girl reached out to touch one of the vines, her fingers brushing against its glowing surface. The plant shuddered slightly, its glow intensifying as it seemed to respond to her touch. She giggled softly, the sound like a spark of light in the heavy silence. "Stay close," Sarah warned, her voice firm but gentle. She stepped closer to the children, her eyes sweeping the chamber again. "We don't know what's safe here." The boy nodded, keeping a protective arm around his sister. Sarah moved to examine one of the pools of liquid, crouching down and shining her flashlight over its surface. It shimmered and rippled, almost as if it were alive. She dipped the tip of her finger in, pulling it back quickly when the liquid clung to her skin like a thin, silvery film. "It's warm," she muttered, rubbing her fingers together. The liquid evaporated almost instantly, leaving no trace behind. She frowned, her curiosity piqued but her caution overriding any urge to investigate further. Suddenly, the boy tensed, his head snapping toward the far end of the chamber. "Someone's coming," he whispered, his voice tight with fear. Sarah's blood ran cold. She stood, drawing her weapon and motioning for the children to stay behind her. The girl clung to her brother, her glow dimming as her fear took hold. The sound of footsteps echoed through the chamber, growing louder with each passing second. Sarah's grip on her weapon tightened, her heart pounding in her chest. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall and imposing, its outline framed by the glowing vines. It was another alien, but this one was different from the hunters they'd encountered before. Its skin was a deep, iridescent blue, and it wore intricate armor that seemed to shimmer and shift with the light. Its eyes glowed softly, filled with an intelligence that sent a chill down Sarah's spine. The alien stopped a few feet away, its gaze fixed on the children. It raised a hand, palm out, as if to show it meant no harm. "Do not be afraid," it said, its voice smooth and melodic. "I am not your enemy." Sarah didn't lower her weapon. "Who are you?" she demanded. "And what do you want?" The alien turned its gaze to her, its expression unreadable. "My name is Kaler," it said. "I am a guardian of these lands, sworn to protect those who seek refuge here." The boy stepped forward slightly, his body still tense. "Why are you here?" he asked, his voice cautious but steady. Kaler's gaze softened as it looked at the boy. "I sensed your presence," it said. "You are in great danger, and this sanctuary cannot shield you for long. The hunters are relentless. They will not stop until they have what they seek." Sarah narrowed her eyes, her instincts screaming at her not to trust the stranger. "And what do you seek?" she asked. Kaler met her gaze, its expression solemn. "To help you," it said simply. "But time is short. If we do not leave this place soon, none of us will survive." Sarah hesitated, her mind racing. Every instinct told her to be wary, but the desperation in Kaler's voice was impossible to ignore. She glanced at the children, their frightened faces tugging at her heart. "Fine," she said finally, lowering her weapon but not putting it away. "But if you try anything, I won't hesitate to stop you." Kaler nodded, its expression calm. "You have my word," it said. "Now follow me. There is a way out, but we must move quickly." As they followed Kaler toward the far end of the chamber, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was about to become even more perilous. The alien's presence raised more questions than it answered, and she couldn't help but wonder if trusting it was a mistake. But for now, it was their best chance, and she would do whatever it took to keep the children safe. Kaler moved with precision and confidence, leading the group through the labyrinthine tunnels. The children stayed close to Sarah, their small hands gripping her jacket as if letting go would mean losing her forever. The dim, pulsing light of the vines illuminated their path, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Sarah kept her weapon drawn, her eyes scanning every corner, every crevice, for signs of danger. The alien guardian's words echoed in her mind. "The hunters are relentless. They will not stop until they have what they seek." Her stomach churned at the thought of what these creatures might do to the children if they were caught. She didn't trust Kaler entirely, but so far, he hadn't given her a reason to doubt his intentions. That didn't mean she'd let her guard down. After several minutes of silence, Kaler paused at an intersection of 3 tunnels. He extended a hand, his long fingers glowing faintly as he seemed to feel the air. "This way," he said, motioning toward the tunnel on the right. "What's down the other paths?" Sarah asked, her voice low. Kaler glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "The left leads to a collapsed passage. The middle leads to them." Sarah's grip on her weapon tightened. "Them?" Kaler turned away, his tone grave. "The hunters. They're closer than you think." The children froze at his words, their glow flickering as fear washed over them. Sarah crouched to their level, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. "Hey," she said gently. "We're going to be okay. Stick with me, and I'll keep you safe." The boy nodded, his jaw set with determination, while the girl leaned into Sarah's side, her tiny hands clutching her sleeve. Sarah straightened, meeting Kaler's gaze. "Lead the way," she said. They moved quickly, the tunnel sloping upward as the air grew colder and thinner. Sarah's breath misted in front of her, and the faint sound of wind echoed in the distance. It was a welcome sign they were nearing the surface. But then, the ground beneath them began to tremble. It was subtle at first, like a low hum, but it quickly grew into a violent shaking that sent dust and debris raining from the ceiling. The girl screamed, clutching her brother as the tunnel walls cracked and groaned. "Run!" Kaler shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. Sarah grabbed the children, pulling them forward as the tunnel collapsed behind them. The roar of falling rock drowned out everything else, and she could feel the heat of the dust cloud at her back. Kaler was ahead, his movements fluid and swift, his glowing hands lighting the way. The tunnel opened into a vast cavern, the ceiling high above them and dotted with glowing crystals that bathed the space in a soft, bluish light. Sarah stumbled to a stop, her chest heaving as she looked around. The children clung to her, their eyes wide with terror. Kaler turned to face them, his expression grim. "They've found us," he said. "We must keep moving." As if on cue, a chilling howl echoed through the cavern. Sarah's blood ran cold as she turned toward the sound. Emerging from the shadows were the hunters, sleek, predatory figures with glowing red eyes and razor-sharp claws. They moved with terrifying speed, their bodies almost blending into the darkness. "Get behind me," Sarah barked, pushing the children toward Kaler. She raised her weapon, firing at the nearest hunter. The shot hit its mark, but the creature barely slowed, its glowing eyes locked on her. Kaler stepped forward, his hands glowing brighter as he unleashed a wave of energy. The blast sent 2 hunters flying, their bodies slamming into the cavern wall with a sickening crunch. But more were coming, their numbers overwhelming. The boy suddenly stepped out from behind Kaler, his small hand glowing with the same strange energy. Sarah's heart leaped into her throat as he raised it toward the advancing hunters. A burst of light shot from his palm, striking one of the creatures and sending it sprawling. "Stay back," Sarah shouted, grabbing the boy and pulling him behind her. "Let me handle this." The boy looked up at her, his eyes filled with determination. "I can help," he said, his voice steady despite the fear in his expression. Before Sarah could respond, Kaler moved beside them, his energy forming a glowing barrier that blocked the hunter's advance. "We must go now," he said, his voice strained. "This fight cannot be won." Sarah didn't argue. She scooped up the girl, who clung to her like a lifeline, and grabbed the boy's hand. Kaler led the way, his barrier holding the hunters at bay as they ran toward a narrow passage at the far end of the cavern. The sound of claws scraping against stone grew louder, the hunters relentless in their pursuit. Sarah's legs burned with the effort of running, but she didn't slow. The passage was tight, the walls pressing in on all sides, but it was their only option. The tunnel opened into another chamber, smaller but just as brightly lit by the glowing crystals. At the center of the room was a strange, circular platform covered in intricate, glowing symbols. Kaler motioned toward it. "Stand there," he said. "It's a transport. It will take us to safety." Sarah hesitated, her instincts screaming against trusting something so alien. But the sound of the hunters closing in left her no choice. She stepped onto the platform, pulling the children with her. Kaler followed, his hands glowing as he touched the edge of the platform. The symbols flared to life, and a low hum filled the chamber. Sarah felt the ground shift beneath her feet, a strange, weightless sensation washing over her. The hunters burst into the chamber just as the light enveloped them, their snarls echoing as everything went white. When the light faded, they were no longer in the cavern. They stood in a new space, vast and open, with towering pillars and walls made of shimmering, crystalline material. The air was warm and fragrant, filled with the faint hum of energy. Kaler turned to them, his expression unreadable. "We are safe for now," he said, "but the true challenge lies ahead." Sarah set the girl down gently, her knees threatening to buckle beneath her. She glanced around, her mind struggling to process their new surroundings. "Where are we?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kaler's gaze softened as he looked at the children. "Home," he said, "or at least what remains of it." The crystalline chamber shimmered with a light that seemed to emanate from every surface. It was unlike anything Sarah had ever seen. Beautiful yet alien, soothing yet unsettling. The children stared wide-eyed at their surroundings, their glowing skin blending with the ambient light. Kaler stood a few feet ahead, his posture relaxed but his eyes scanning the chamber as if searching for something unseen. "This is a sanctuary," Kaler explained, his voice quiet but firm. "It is hidden from the hunters, but not impervious to their reach. We cannot stay here long." Sarah kept a protective arm around the children, her instincts screaming that danger could strike at any moment. "How did you know about this place?" she asked, her tone sharp with suspicion. Kaler met her gaze, his expression calm. "I once served the royal family," he said. "This was a safe haven created for their lineage, a place of last resort. It is their connection to the ancient energy of our kind that allowed us entry." Sarah frowned, her mind racing. The royal family was something Kaler had only hinted at before, but his words now confirmed her suspicions. These children weren't just ordinary aliens. They were important, possibly vital, to whatever society they came from. The boy stepped forward, his small frame radiating a quiet determination. "You said we can't stay here. Where do we go next?" he asked, his voice steady despite the tremor in his glowing hands. Kaler hesitated, his gaze shifting between the boy and the girl. "There is a portal," he said finally. "It leads to your home world, but it is ancient and unstable. Activating it will draw attention, both from our enemies and from those who wish to exploit your lineage." The girl clutched Sarah's hand, her glow dimming slightly as fear crept into her expression. "Will it hurt?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kaler knelt before her, his glowing hands resting gently on her shoulders. "No," he said softly, "but it will require strength from all of us." Sarah watched the interaction, her heart tightening. The way Kaler spoke to the children wasn't just protective. It was reverent, as if he saw them as something far greater than they appeared. It only deepened her resolve to keep them safe, no matter the cost. "How far is this portal?" Sarah asked, breaking the moment. Kaler stood, his expression grim. "Beyond the sanctuary lies the Rift Plains," he said. "A treacherous expanse filled with ancient predators and unstable energy fields. It will test every ounce of our will." "Of course it will," Sarah muttered under her breath, running a hand through her hair. "Fina, let's move before the hunters catch up." Kaler led the way, his movements fluid and precise. The children followed close behind, their small hands gripping Sarah's jacket as they navigated the labyrinthine corridors of the sanctuary. The glowing walls seemed to hum with life, pulsating in time with their footsteps. As they moved deeper into the structure, Sarah noticed the air growing heavier, charged with an almost electric tension. "What is this place, really?" she asked, her voice low. Kaler glanced over his shoulder. "It is a fragment of what our world once was," he said. "A refuge for the royal bloodline and their protectors. Much of it has been lost to time, but its essence remains." The boy's gaze sharpened at Kaler's words. "You keep talking about the royal family," he said. "What does that have to do with us?" Kaler stopped, turning to face the children. His expression was a mix of sadness and pride. "Because you are the last of them," he said. "The only ones who can restore what has been broken." The girl's eyes widened, her glow brightening as she clung to Sarah. "I don't understand," she whispered. Kaler knelt again, his voice gentle but firm. "You are more than you know," he said. "Your blood carries the power of our ancestors, a power that can unite or destroy. The hunters seek to control it, but it belongs to you alone." The boy's jaw tightened, his hands curling into fists. "Then we have to stop them," he said. "We can't let them take it." Sarah placed a hand on his shoulder, her grip firm. "And we won't," she said. "But first, we need to get out of here alive." Kaler nodded, rising to his feet. "Then we must move quickly. The Rift Plains are unforgiving, and the portal will not wait forever." They pressed on, the corridors eventually opening into a massive archway. Beyond it lay the Rift Plains, a vast and desolate expanse of jagged rocks and swirling energy storms. The air was thick with static, crackling with an unseen power that made Sarah's skin prickle. Kaler stepped forward, his glow intensifying as he scanned the terrain. "Stay close," he said. "The energy fields are unpredictable. Straying too far could be fatal." Sarah nodded, tightening her grip on the girl's hand as they stepped onto the rocky terrain. The ground beneath them was unstable, shifting slightly with each step. The boy stayed close, his eyes darting around as if expecting an attack at any moment. The first storm hit without warning. A swirling vortex of energy descended upon them, its force sending shards of rock flying in every direction. Sarah threw herself over the children, shielding them as Kaler raised a glowing barrier to deflect the debris. "This is only the beginning," Kaler warned, his voice strained. "The closer we get to the portal, the stronger the storms will become." "Great," Sarah muttered, helping the children to their feet. "Let's keep moving before we get vaporized." They pushed forward, the storms growing more frequent and violent with each passing moment. The children's glow flickered, their energy drained by the chaotic environment. Sarah's muscles burned as she carried the girl through a particularly rough patch of terrain, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Finally, they reached a massive circular platform in the center of the plains. It was ancient and weathered, covered in intricate symbols that glowed faintly in the stormlight. At its center stood a towering obelisk, its surface etched with the same glowing runes. "The portal," Kaler said, his voice reverent. "But it requires their energy to activate." The boy stepped forward, his expression resolute. "What do we have to do?" he asked. Kaler placed a hand on his shoulder. "Stand at the base of the obelisk," he said. Focus your energy and let it flow into the runes. It will guide you. The girl hesitated, fear flickering in her eyes. Sarah knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. You can do this, she said gently. I'm right here with you. The girl nodded, her small hands trembling as she took her brother's hand. Together, they stepped onto the platform, their glow intensifying as they approached the obelisk. The runes began to pulse with light, the energy flowing through them like a heartbeat. Kaler stood at the edge of the platform, his gaze fixed on the children. Focus, he said. The portal will open, but you must remain strong. Do not waver. As the runes flared to life, the storms around them intensified. Sarah could feel the ground shaking beneath her feet, the air crackling with energy. She gripped her weapon, her eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of the hunters. The obelisk began to hum, its light growing brighter with each passing second. The portal was opening, but so were the doors to whatever dangers awaited them on the other side. The portal's activation sent a shockwave rippling through the rift plains, its light piercing the chaotic storms like a beacon. Sarah shielded her eyes as the air shimmered and warped around the obelisk, a swirling vortex of energy materializing in its center. The children stood side by side, their glow steady and strong despite the fierce winds that lashed at their small forms. Kaler's voice cut through the roaring storm. The portal is open, but it won't hold for long. We must go now. Sarah hesitated, her instincts screaming that something was wrong. The air was too still despite the chaos, the oppressive weight of anticipation settling over her like a second skin. Her grip on her weapon tightened, her eyes scanning the horizon. A shadow moved in the distance, and then another. Her heart sank as the hunters emerged from the storm, their sleek forms glinting in the eerie light of the portal. They moved with terrifying precision, their glowing eyes locked on the children. They're here, Sarah shouted, raising her weapon. Kaler stepped forward, his glow intensifying as he prepared to face the threat. Get the children through the portal, he commanded. I will hold them off. The boy turned, his eyes wide with fear. But you'll be trapped, he cried. Kaler's expression softened, a flicker of sadness crossing his face. This is my duty, he said. Your safety is all that matters. Before anyone could protest, the hunters launched their attack. Blades of energy shot through the air, slicing through the storm with deadly precision. Kaler raised his hands, a shimmering shield forming around him as he intersected the strikes. Move, he barked, his voice sharp with urgency. Sarah didn't need to be told twice. She grabbed the children's hands, pulling them toward the portal as Kaler engaged the hunters. The ground trembled beneath their feet, the portal's energy destabilizing with each passing moment. The girl stumbled, her glow flickering as exhaustion overtook her. Sarah scooped her up without hesitation, her muscles straining as she carried the small child toward the vortex. The boy clung to her side, his determined expression masking the fear that radiated from him. Behind them, the battle raged on. Kaler fought with a ferocity that Sarah hadn't seen before, his movements fluid and precise as he deflected the hunters' attacks. But even he couldn't hold them off forever. One of the hunters broke through his defenses, its blade slicing through the edge of his shield. Kaler staggered, blood glowing faintly as it dripped from the wound. He gritted his teeth, redoubling his efforts as he shouted over his shoulder. Go! Now! Sarah reached the edge of the portal, the swirling energy sending waves of heat and static through the air. The boy hesitated, glancing back at Kaler with tears in his glowing eyes. We can't just leave him, he pleaded. We don't have a choice, Sarah said, her voice firm. He's buying us time. Don't waste it. With a final look of despair, the boy stepped into the portal, his form dissolving into the light. Sarah followed, clutching the girl tightly as she plunged into the vortex. The sensation was disorienting, her vision blurring as the energy enveloped her. For a moment, there was nothing but light and sound, a deafening roar that seemed to consume everything, and then silence. Sarah stumbled as they emerged on the other side, her legs buckling beneath her. The ground was cool and solid, the air sharp and crisp. She looked around, her breath catching in her throat as she took in their surroundings. They were standing in the middle of a vast, crystalline chamber, its walls shimmering with an otherworldly light. The architecture was unlike anything she'd ever seen, elegant and intricate, with symbols etched into every surface. The air was heavy with energy, the hum of ancient power filling the space. The boy stood nearby, his gaze darting around as he tried to process what he was seeing. The girl clung to Sarah, her small body trembling as she buried her face in Sarah's jacket. "Is this our home?" the boy whispered, his voice filled with awe. Before Sarah could answer, a group of figures emerged from the shadows. They were tall and regal, their glowing forms adorned with ornate garments that marked them as people of great importance. Their eyes fixed on the children, a mixture of shock and reverence crossing their faces. "Kaler did it," one of them said, their voice filled with disbelief. "The heirs have returned." The boy stepped forward, his posture stiff as he squared his shoulders. "We don't understand what's happening," he said. "But if you know who we are, you need to help us." The figures exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. Finally, the tallest of them stepped forward, bowing deeply. "You are the last of the royal bloodline," they said, "the saviors of our people. Your return marks the beginning of a new era, but it also brings great danger." Sarah stepped protectively in front of the children, her eyes narrowing. "Danger from who?" she demanded. "We just escaped a squad of hunters. Are there more coming?" The figure nodded solemnly. "The hunters serve those who wish to claim the throne for themselves," they said. "They will stop at nothing to eliminate the true heirs." The boy clenched his fists, his glow intensifying. "Then we'll fight," he said. "We're not going to let them take everything from us." The figure smiled faintly, their expression tinged with sadness. "Your courage is admirable," they said. "But this battle is not yours to fight alone. We will stand with you." Sarah felt a flicker of hope, but it was quickly overshadowed by a sense of foreboding. They had escaped the Rift Plains and the hunters, but their journey was far from over. The children's lineage had placed them at the center of a conflict far greater than any of them had anticipated, and the stakes were higher than ever. As the chamber filled with light, Sarah tightened her grip on the girl's hand. Whatever lay ahead, she would face it with them. They had come too far to turn back now. The grand hall of the alien citadel was a breathtaking sight, its walls carved from luminous crystal that pulsed with a rhythm Sarah could feel in her chest. The gathered crowd, a mix of alien factions, hummed with tension, their bioluminescent bodies reflecting the pale light of the throne at the center. Sarah stood at the foot of the dais with the children, their small hands clutching hers tightly as the murmurs grew louder. The boy stepped forward, his glow brighter than Sarah had ever seen. His sister followed, her head held high despite the exhaustion in her eyes. Their presence silenced the room, the weight of their lineage undeniable. A regal figure emerged from the shadows, their attire glinting with jewels that refracted light in every color imaginable. Their expression was one of wary respect as they addressed the children. "You claim the throne as the rightful heirs," they said, their voice carrying authority. "But the throne is not given, it is earned." The boy raised his chin, determination blazing in his glowing eyes. "We're not here to claim power for ourselves," he said. "We're here to unite our people. The division has cost too much." A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd, but it was quickly drowned out by a voice from the far end of the hall. "Empty words from a child." The speaker was a tall, imposing figure whose dark glow seemed to absorb the light around them. They stepped forward, their eyes locked on the children with contempt. "They are untested, unworthy. The throne should belong to those who have proven their strength." Sarah's instincts flared as she stepped protectively in front of the children. "They've survived more than most adults ever could," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "And they've done it without cruelty or greed." The challengers sneered, their glow intensifying. "Then let them prove it," they said, turning to the assembly. "A trial by combat, as tradition demands." The hall erupted into chaos, voices shouting both in support and protest. Sarah's heart pounded as she turned to the boy. "You can't fight them," she whispered urgently. "It's too dangerous." He met her gaze with a calm she hadn't expected. "If we back down now, they'll never follow us," he said. "We have to try." Before Sarah could argue further, the regal figure raised a hand, silencing the crowd. "The challenge is valid," they said. "The heirs will face a trial of unity. They must prove their bond and their strength to lead." A circular platform rose from the floor, its surface glowing with intricate patterns. The children stepped onto it together, their glow merging into a single, harmonious light. The crowd watched in tense silence as the challenger followed, their dark aura crackling with power. Sarah's fists clenched at her sides, every instinct screaming at her to intervene. But this was their fight, and she had to trust them. "You've got this," she whispered, more to herself than to them. The trial began with a surge of energy that sent a shockwave through the hall. The platform shifted and reformed, creating an arena of jagged crystal spires and shifting ground. The children moved in unison, their glow pulsing in time with the energy of the arena. The challenger lunged, their movements sharp and brutal, but the children's bond proved their greatest strength. The boy deflected the attacks with barriers of light, while the girl countered with bursts of energy that shattered the crystal spires. The battle was intense, the air thick with tension as the two sides clashed. The children faltered at times, their exhaustion evident, but they never gave up. Sarah watched with bated breath, her heart aching with pride and fear. Finally, the boy and girl combined their powers in a final, blinding surge of energy that overwhelmed the challenger's dark aura. The crowd erupted in cheers as the challenger fell to their knees, their glow dimmed but not extinguished. The regal figure stepped forward, their expression one of solemn approval. "The trial is complete," they announced. "The heirs have proven their worth." The children stood tall, their glow steady despite their obvious exhaustion. Sarah rushed to their side, pulling them into a tight embrace. "You did it," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm so proud of you." The boy looked up at her, his expression softening. "We couldn't have done it without you," he said. "You've been with us every step of the way." The crowd knelt as the children ascended the dais, their light filling the hall with a sense of hope and unity. Sarah stood at the edge, her heart swelling with pride as she watched them take their place on the throne. The war was not over and challenges would continue to come, but for the first time, there was a sense of peace, a chance for a brighter future. And Sarah knew she would stand by their side through it all, their bond unbreakable.